Well, hello everyone and good afternoon. Happy Friday. We're thrilled to have you here. And I know folks are still trickling in, but we want to be respectful of your time. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Real quickly, I'm Mary Dyer, Financial Education Programs Manager at the Finance Authority of Maine. And I'm thrilled to be joined with Steve Kautz, who is our Financial Education Program Specialist at FAME and a personal finance educator and an expert on this particular topic and many others. This is part of our ongoing monthly series, our Financial Check-In with FAME webinar series. And so today we're going to be talking about budgeting and emergency funds. But I just want to call out that we next month will be hosting a session on understanding the differences between the Alphon Grant and Maine's 529 Education Savings Plan. That's going to be on November 1st at noon. We host this series on the first Friday of every month at noon, and there is a calendar, a full calendar of webinars available on the FAME website. So we're, again, thrilled that you'll join us and hope that you'll consider joining us in the future. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Steve. But before I do, feel free as we move through the webinar to put any questions that you may have in the Q&A box, in that Q&A feature that's within the Zoom, should be at the bottom of your screen. We like to avoid using the chat. It's a little easier to use the Q&A, and I may actually just shut that off so it's not available. But if you have questions, we want you to ask them. And then also know that at any time after the webinar, Steve is available and we're happy to support you and provide resources as where possible. The other thing, we are recording right now. So if for any reason you have to hop off or just can't stay on for the entire webinar, or you want to share it with others, we will have this recording available on FAME's YouTube channel. And we'll send you a link to that early next week. So again, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Steve. Thanks so much, and take it away.
Right. Thank you, Mary. Hi, everybody. Mary said, my name is Steve Kautz, Financial Education Program Specialist with FAME. And today's topic, if my slide would advance, hold on one second. There we go. Budgeting and emergency funds. And we're really going to focus on the budgeting aspect today, and some talk about emergency funds and touch on a few other personal finance topics as time permits. So like Mary said, feel free to ask other questions. And if we have time, we can address those or provide other resources. So jumping into budgeting. Mary said I'm an expert. Maybe that's true. It definitely through experience and experience of not having done it very well for a long time when I was younger, but I got very determined to get better in my personal finances, and learning to budget and using a budget was a major turning point in that journey for me. And I put a little budget there in the toolbox. If you think of your toolbox as your personal finance toolbox of all the things that could be in there, insurance and taxes and investing, the budget is right there on the top of all the tools, because for me, it started there to get things in order. And I think for a lot of folks, getting a handle on a budget, using a budget regularly, leads to many, many other good personal finance situations. So that's where we're focused today. And you can see a picture there of a handwritten budget, which is how I started. A day at a time, just with a certain amount of money to spend on a day and keeping track of it for the day, and then expanded to maybe a week. But before I got to really using that budget, before that, my strategy was more like this. I would say, okay, what's the minimum payment to pay on all of my credit cards? And should I get a new card to help me get out of this mess? And maybe things like, what's the balance in my account according to the receipt on the ATM, because I wasn't really keeping track. So I've been there. And I understand. And if you find yourself either already really budgeting or in that other situation or somewhere in between, hopefully we can cover a few tips today that can get you on the next step on your journey. I have some questions to ask in a poll. I'm going to start a poll just so I get an idea of where folks are heading into this session today, and it might inform how I address some of the topics. So you should see a poll up on your screen. I see responses coming in, so hopefully that means it's working. Give everybody enough time here to answer the 5 questions. Thank you for participating. See a lot of answers coming in. 26 participants, so we'll give a little more time. All right, seems like we're hovering around 20 responses. Gonna go another 30 seconds on the poll if anyone's still trying to answer, and then we'll look at the results. Okay, I'm gonna take a look at the results that we have. And so we can see in the first question, where are you with budgeting? It looks like about half of our crew today are using a budget. Some folks are not, and some are sometimes. So a good mix. Hopefully, if you are using one, today's session can give you some encouragement to keep going or make some adjustments. And everyone else maybe get started or increase your consistency with budgeting. Number 2, half the crew doing it on paper. Doing it on their computer. A few using apps and a few still on paper. And then again, a few not budgeting. Emergency funds. So a full half have something going on with an emergency fund. Some have several months. So today, one of the things we'll touch on is what you do with your emergency fund. So that could be useful for folks who already have one. And then saving, more than half already saving and investing. Being on a budget, having an emergency fund are probably the 2 questions I would ask somebody if they say, oh, I want to start investing. I'm ready to invest. Those are definite, really important factors to see before saving and investing. And then other than a home mortgage, we're having some debt and some folks with a lot. So the budget will definitely come into play in terms of helping you to address debt and then move on to the next stage of your personal financial journey. All right, let's go back to the slides. So wherever you were on that arrangement of poll questions today, right? No judgment at all. Again, I've been there, worked with people who who really are sophisticated budgeters and still have financial trouble, and people who are just starting, who are really on the way to solidifying their personal finances. The important thing is to get to work from wherever you are to go to the next goal that you want to achieve. And that quote, I'm just going to show that again. A lot of folks think once they get on a budget, it's too constraining. It depends. If you're really trying to make ends meet and trying to pay off debt, a budget should be fairly tight, incredibly tight, to make sure that every dollar is doing its best for you. But ultimately, you want the budget to be sort of a barrier or boundary to help you stay within that, and still be able to enjoy life and reach your goals. But it is empowering when you're on a budget and you know where you stand. So it helps with a lot of things, worth repeating: setting goals, analyzing your spending. Sometimes seeing it on a budget can really help hold up the mirror and say, what am I doing with my money? Which is why that mirror is there. Starting and stopping habits. I could talk about things like streaming services all day. That is sort of it used to be people would look at, well, how much are you spending going out for coffee? Now I think a more significant question is, how much are we spending on things like streaming services? And the average American is spending quite a bit. And they creep up a few dollars here, a few dollars there. Before you know it, they're really draining your budget. And that could be more expensive things as well. The budget helps with emergencies in terms of setting up and maintaining and monitoring your emergency fund. And then if those things are in order, staying on the budget can help guide you in your saving and investing process and the future you. Ultimately, the budget gives me peace of mind and the truth, even if I don't like it. Even if the budget tells me I can't afford that thing 3 months from now, I can't afford that trip 3 months from now. Even if it tells me that, I still feel better knowing where I stand. On the other hand, when I can afford to buy something because I've planned and it was a goal and the budget reflects that and the numbers look good, I feel very good about that. And that gives me peace of mind. So depending on the stage you're at, the truth might be, can't spend that money right now. Or the truth might be, you have freedom to spend some money. Either way, that peace of mind that a good budgeter can develop is critical in the personal finance journey. Some more budgeting tips, if you will. It's good that a budget is measurable, meaning, and you'll see on the different options in terms of your goals. So if my goal is to save a certain amount of money in 2 years, the budget can help you see along as you're going, am I saving enough every month to reach that savings goal in 2 years? And how much do I want to save, or what it is that I need to purchase? Goals, as it pertains to budgeting and your finances, goals should be actionable, meaning you can take action on that goal. For example, savings or reducing debt, education savings for children, and so on, or for yourself. And goals with relation to budgeting really have to be realistic. Saying I'm going to, when I do this with high school students, saying I'm going to save to buy $100,000 car, yet they're looking at their income and they don't match up, not always a good thing to do. So be careful with goals to make sure they are realistic and they push you, but you can attain them. And time, giving yourself enough time, not so you have that sense of achievement and accomplishment rather than beating up on yourself. And again, knowing the situation you're in. From the poll questions, some folks may be managing a lot of debt and their goal might be pay off the debt. Some folks are already saving and investing, and their goal may be how to maximize that or retire early or so on. And on budgeting, consider all expenses, no matter how small. The star I'll put next to that is, the tighter your budget has to be, the smaller the expenses you need to be very careful with. As your budget is more flexible because you have a good difference between your income and your expenses, perhaps you don't have to pay as much attention to smaller expenses. When I was just getting on my feet for budgeting, I tracked literally every dollar. And over time, it's grown to where, okay, I know I have a little bit a month that I don't have to think about too much. But again, it's relative to where you are, and that's really important consideration. It's important to monitor and adjust the budget as you go along. Grocery bill, watch closely, because we know what we've been going through with inflation the last few years, and we know what's been happening with prices. And I know that just in the last few months, whatever I thought my grocery budget was, after analyzing our actual spending, I underestimated. I had to adjust that. And now for the next several months, I'm trying to swing the other way, where maybe I'll overestimate a little bit what food is going to cost. Regularly shop fixed expenses. So I mentioned streaming. It's not just what you're paying for streaming, it's how many services. Most stories I hear and have read the data, people don't even remember signing up for certain services, and then they're stunned when they see it on their credit card bill. The average American thinks, this is very interesting, the average American thinks they're spending $86 a month on streaming. In reality, the average American is spending almost double that, because they don't remember all the services they signed up for. And we'll see in a little bit, $50 a month can go a long way. Insurances. Insurance is something, there's a lot of pressure on insurance rates to go up right now with the disasters. That is a fact of life. It's still helpful to shop your insurance. Budget to fit your lifestyle, not to make you miserable. Again, thinking of it, and I took this from a colleague, thinking of it as a nutrition plan rather than a restricted diet, not a straitjacket. I also say bowling alley bumpers. It keeps me in there from going too far one way or the other. Self-discipline. Mostly this comes down to behavior. We can research and look at all kinds of budgeting tools, but it's going to be how we behave. And getting it in the budget, again, for me and people I've worked with, having a good budget helps that, because it shows you the results of your planning versus your reality and your experience. There's something out there now called loud budgeting, which is really a social media phenomena, but long before it had that name, I think it was out there. And now loud budgeting is people going on social media and saying, I'm not going to go to that restaurant with my friends because I don't want to spend $60 on a meal. I'm going to do this instead. And they're putting these things out there. Before the term loud budgeting came along, good budgeters and people who were really trying to get control of their personal finances were already doing that and just saying, no, I can't do that thing because I have other things I want to do. And the budget helps with that. Analyzing when you are in a situation, Americans tend to think, I've been there, we tend to think we have an income problem. We always look at things usually as an income problem. The fact is, many cases, it's an expense problem. Sometimes income can be raised to help with our budgeting or financial situation, either by temporary side jobs or by career management. But it's often problems we face are expense problems. Cutting a little bit here or there, sometimes making bigger cuts, are what our lifestyle may really need. And the budget is, again, that tool that can help do that. Ultimately, why do this? Well, in the short run, it may be to help get out of debt. In the long run, being on a budget leads to bigger financial success. The car you want, the retirement at the age you want and the lifestyle you want, education, savings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's ultimately where this is heading, and I'm going to be mentioning that several times. So I thought it'd be interesting to look at, as a country, where does our money go? So this is from the USDA statistics from a couple of years ago. Regionally, of course, this could be different. If you are in southern Maine right now, having your housing expense at 33% of your household budget is hard. But in other places, it could be even less. So these are national averages, but very, very interesting to look at the things that we spend our money on as a country. No surprise. Housing, number one, transportation, number two, food, and insurance, healthcare, and so on down to the smaller categories. But the housing and transportation taking up a full 50% typically of our budget. And you might, look at this and think it's good to reflect on your own budget and say, what am I doing in terms of percentages? Am I spending 30% on housing? Again, nationwide, in some parts of Maine or New England, or maybe it could be higher. But it's good to know where you are, and that might tell you whether your housing expense is out of line. If you are a homeowner and you have your mortgage, there might not be much you can do about that in the short run. But for renters, considering, am I renting an appropriate space? Should I take on a roommate? Or if you're a homeowner and you have an extra room, can I reduce housing costs by taking on a roommate for a time anyway? So that's just an interesting look at some nationwide. And then laying that next to the classic pyramid of needs and wants for not necessarily financial, but when you look at these and at the base physiological needs, our food, our housing, 33% of budgets, that's the foundation, that's the platform. And food, that's all down there. And then the other pieces of our need pyramid overlap with our budget, and I'll show these together, how folks are spending their money and comparing that to the classic psychological analysis of our needs and wants. Interesting to look at, and I think important to always look in the mirror and ask ourselves, why, if I'm unhappy with my budget situation, and I want to make some cuts, why am I buying the things that I'm buying if they're not needs? If they're needs, can I cut the costs somehow? If they're wants, but I don't like the result I'm headed toward in terms of what I'm saving, how can I change that? How can I dig into that? So I thought it was interesting to take a look at. And your budget is going to face external pressures. Becoming a good budgeter for yourself, very important skill. And then you're always kind of managing the stuff going on around. Thinking about inflation, accounting for inflation. In some areas of our economy, it's stable. It may still be higher than we'd like, but it's fairly stable in relation to a lot of parts of the world. But it's certainly higher than we were used to in the years before the pandemic. And now we're entering a period where it seems to have gone down and stabilized, but clearly on some items. I mean, the price of eggs, which used to be the subject of a joke, I feel, when I was a kid, what does that have to do with the price of eggs? And now every time I go to the store, the price of eggs is flip-flop one way or another because of this crisis or this disease or some other impact on the supply of and price of eggs. So inflation is one that's all around us all the time. The political environment can affect our budgets because as political decisions are made and people are elected, they might be discussing policies that could affect your budget one way or another in terms of taxes, especially. Local governments, absolutely, in terms of taxes and other costs you might face at home. So these are other unemployment situation has been quite low. Overall, some people are still affected, but we're in a period of relatively low and stable employment. So how does that impact your budget? Well, does that mean you can have a better feeling about your stability of your job for the next year? Statistically speaking, yes, but for any one person that can change. So again, an external factor. The changes in the environment, climate change, no matter what it's caused by, it is definitely, and whether it's permanent, it's definitely here. And the increase of storms and the severity, Maine last year hit very hard. Other places around the country now going through stuff. The environment, the impact on our insurance rates, all of these things will have an effect on our budgets. Our career, what's happening in our industry. Are jobs likely to be available? Are incomes going up? Are there changes that I might want to make in anticipation? Family factors, of course, and then question mark for any number of things that can jump in and affect our budget. I just got a puppy. Yeah, major budget factor, to say the least, in terms of the initial costs of getting a puppy from a rescue and the shots and everything in the food. But we planned for it. And still some surprises in there. So mentioned before, worth mentioning many times, ultimately personal finance is not a lot of technical or head knowledge. It's very easy to find things nowadays. It's ultimately behavior, 80%, maybe more. But certainly, how do we make ourselves, push ourselves toward the decisions that we know we need to make? Again, I think the budget helps with that. So let's go into some budgeting options. I highlighted spreadsheet because I'm going to spend most of my chatting is going to be about using spreadsheets. It's what I use. It works the best for me. However, I am going to talk a little bit about some of these other types of budgeting. Paper, pencil, envelopes, wonderful system if that works for you. Keeping track in a notebook of what you spend versus what you can spend. Again, for a day, for a week, for a month, really effective for new budgeters or short-term budgeters who are really in a crunch, to have a notebook and track expenses compared to what you have available, breaking it down even on a daily basis. And some folks advocate using envelopes and using cash, putting the certain amount of cash you can spend for a particular topic into an envelope, and when that cash is gone, it's gone. Still an effective way to budget, but I think the pencil and paper has a great place, again, for new budgeters or folks who are really crunched. I would recommend, if you're just starting getting into budgeting, or if online budgeting or computer budgeting is not working for you, try a notebook. Apps and software. I'm going to give you the on one hand, on the other hand. On one hand, they do the math. They're convenient. They're colorful and pretty even. They connect you to a lot of different other online tools. The graphics can be useful, if not attractive to look at. Really, what can be done for you by apps and software is truly amazing. However, on the other hand, some of them charge, and the cost can be upfront. Here's one I clipped, $14.99 or $109 a year. In my opinion, you don't need to pay for a decent household budgeting tool. And if you are, that's money coming away from something else. It kind of defeats the purpose. So I would really, if you're paying for a budgeting tool, think twice about that. Feel free to reach out to me via email, and we can talk more. So I don't love the fact that I don't like it at all that some of these apps charge. And sometimes the charges are hidden. To unlock all the features of the budget, you either have to pay or be a member, and then it's just one more use of your data, and there are costs to that. 100 emails a month, whatever it may be. So I don't feel great about apps, and many do that. Some I have read are really consumer oriented and don't do that, especially if they come from your bank. Some banks offer budgeting tools which are really streamlined and just for your benefit. And that's where I would lean if you wanted to look at an app or software. Look to your bank first to see if they have a tool. With apps, I don't feel you touch the numbers as much. Of course, touch, this is figurative, not literal. But when you write it on paper or you're typing your own spreadsheet, you are touching the numbers. You're seeing the end result. It's your math involved or your spreadsheet formula. I think that's very effective for me and a lot of folks I work with. Not for everybody, but it's a con, in my opinion, to apps and software. The privacy issue. One more thing we put out there where our data and our information is subject to the online world is a risk of apps and software. Many of these cannot tailor to your specific situation. Some are more flexibility, but many of them are very standard. And many of them that I have looked at focus so much on graphics and reports and fancy things, and they don't focus enough on the basics, which is money coming in, money going out, and looking at where your expenses, where you're spending that money. So to me, these are the pros and cons. I'll show the pros again and the cons. Again, I think probably knowing yourself in terms of in general, are you someone who's very comfortable with apps? Then you probably be comfortable with a budgeting app. But again, look to banks or other potentially even other nonprofit places for a budgeting app. This is an online, simple 1 month online budget that I really like. So I'm not going to call it an app or a software. It's an online and it's nonprofit. It's from consumer.gov. And I'm going to show this, and I have to switch screens in order to do that. So give me a moment here to switch screens. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. Again, this is really a wonderful tool. Find the chat here. I'll put it in a moment. It sets everything up for you. You can put in your pay. Let's say we have $1,000 coming in, and then a pretty extensive list of expenses: housing, food, transportation, health, personal, family, really extensive. And then down at the end, I'm just going to say, eventually I had $797 of expenses. And when I type that in, it tells you what you had left over. It offers a printing option. Again, month to month, you can label the month. Really like this for a 1 month budget and for accessibility and everything else. So I'm going to put that in the chat to make sure everyone has it. Do that right now so I don't forget. All right, that is in there. Now we can go back to our slides. Okay. All right, so that's the online 1 month budget. And then screen is frozen, folks. Give me a second. There we go. A spreadsheet, homemade spreadsheet, or one you can copy, like from me. And I will give you this one as well that I made and I use with students everywhere. And I've been using this for, I don't know if I should be proud or embarrassed. I've been using this basic thing with students for something like 20 years. And students still tell me, I use your budget all the time. I use your budget all the time because it changes. I can change it as my life changes. So I really like this. You can use it online on free programs like Google Sheets. You don't have to have paid for an Excel program, for example, or an open office free software. You can run it on there. It's personal. It is yours. It's as detailed as you want it to be, incredibly flexible. And to run the basic form of this takes minimal spreadsheet skills. To get more advanced, you can YouTube, just like I'm YouTubing how to put in a pet fence. You can YouTube very quickly how to manage some spreadsheet and develop some skills there. I'm going to switch screens again. to show what this can go to. On the screen in front of you, you see a snapshot of 2 months, money coming in based on $1,000 just for simplicity, money going out, money left over, and it carries to the next month. But to show you what this can do for you, let's see, I'm going to share screen to a different screen. I don't know if this is going to follow. Hopefully you're seeing the budget. If you're not, I'm sure Mary will tell me. This is ultimately where it can lead, is to many, many months of detailed, personal tracking of your expenses. And again, very, very simple spreadsheet skills. There are some formulas in here that are already there. I will make this file available to everybody when we send out the link to the recording. I'll attach this file, or I'll do it in the chat before we finish. And you can use this. Feel free to download it and keep it for your own, modify it. But anything within here, all of these would change the ultimate numbers. So if you take your attention for a moment, right here in the middle of the screen, left over on December 30th, $395. If I go back to the 2 months before, and under the fund category, I change that to 200 and hit enter. Well, now you can see my leftover has changed significantly. So it's automatic, it's all set up. I love this. I went from paper to a month on paper, to a month on this, to 3 months, to a year. And now I'm somewhere between 1 and 3 years. And I can go ahead and change a number now and look at the impact 2 years from now and see if I'm okay with that. Maybe overly detailed, but that it works for me. And I know it does work for a lot of folks, and it's not for everybody. Again, the apps have advantages, and paper has its advantages as well. But I will make this available to anybody who wants to download it. So we'll switch back 2 slides. And it's 12:40. I think I'm doing okay with time. Okay. Yeah, so that was my spreadsheet for a budgeting option. Now let's shift to emergency funds. From the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. I mean, I could say it myself, but I thought this was a really powerful statement. Without savings, a financial shock, even minor, can set you back. And then a real tricky turning point is if it turns into debt. And the emergency fund can help avoid that situation. And that's what's really so critical about it. I see a hand raised. Yes, Mary.
Just want to let you know, Steve, when you were transitioning, your display settings changed, and now I'm seeing both your current slide and your next slide. So I think if you just change your display settings, that would be excellent.
Yep.
It's going fine, and then you know how that happens.
Oh yeah. I don't know. Let's change it. You know, it's not letting me, so I'm gonna stop sharing and try this.
That might work.
Yeah, and it doesn't give me any indication that it's doing that. I don't know. How's that?
Better. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. And then that second paragraph, research suggests that individuals who struggle to recover from a financial shock tend to have less savings to help protect them against future emergencies and so on. And then we rely on credit cards or loans or other situations that are not good for our long-term personal finances. So the emergency fund is critical. Okay. So how do we get there? Many of you said you already have an emergency fund, so you're going to be somewhere along in this range. But step one, if you don't have an emergency fund, set a goal and get started through a change of habits, spending habits, or maybe in the short run, an increase in some income from a side job, or sell some items to get your emergency fund going. So let's say to get a starter emergency fund going, and your goal is, I'm gonna get $500 and forget about it. And I'm gonna do that in a month. So you find a way in your budget to carve out that $125 a week, or through your income to raise that up. So step one would be get something put aside that you have set as a goal, and you get there, you'll feel good about having reached that goal. And then you can look at other steps of emergency funds. Sort of the classic emergency fund step one, I have it as step two, but the classic step one for a lot of financial coaches is to have $1,000. It's been that way for a long time, and I find that interesting that they still say that even with inflation, because $1,000 doesn't get you what it used to. Let's not forget, a lot of this is a psychological barrier. Just getting to that point of knowing I definitely have $1,000 put aside for emergencies. So I don't have to hit a credit card or some other form of borrowing if I need brakes on the car, and so on. So that would be your next step, is get $1,000. And this is truly emergency fund money. You don't want to dip into this to take elective spending, like taking a trip or going to have fun or something like that, or buying a thing that you truly don't need. This is for emergencies. Step three, a full month of expenses put aside for your emergency fund. Whatever your typical month of expenses is, you have a full month of that put aside. And then after that, more advanced, 3 to 6 months of expenses or beyond. A lot of this will be based on your income and your overall expense level. So these are some stages of emergency funds, and I have a little thing there called the side gig effect. Doing a little something on the side for a little extra money or selling some items can give you that boost you need to get started. Just to get that step one, if you don't currently have an emergency fund. And I highly recommend turning over all the rocks to find out which way is going to work for you. All right, this is an abbreviation. I'm calling this Steve's Emergency Fund Equation, EFEQ. This is my equation for what the emergency fund can do. You take the amount that you have at the end of a month in your budget, in your account, minus the need for your emergency fund, whatever step you're on in the emergency fund. What's left over, we can call actual savings. Savings is potential for investing or other purchases coming down the road, the next car, education, whatever that may be, a home. And there's some numbers, for example. So if at the end of any given time period, I have $3,150, but I have an emergency fund of need of $3,000 based on my income or my expenses, that leaves me with $150 left over to start looking at other things. And this equation ultimately points in the direction of improved overall financial wellness. So here's some interesting numbers. Hopefully it's motivation. So is the emergency fund budgeting, is it all worth it? Where does it lead? That's what this is about. Let's look at some interesting stats. Here in the middle, I took $50 a month, $50 a month for 25 years, invested at a pretty common return rate of 6%. Turns out to be $33,814, which is $15,000 in contributions and $18,000 earned. Money that you didn't put in, that earned. You'd say, well, that sounds pretty good. Yeah, it is. That's the power of time and investing. But that $50 a month, where do we get that? That's where the emergency fund and the budget and the emergency fund, having an emergency fund, come into play. What's $50 a month to break it down? When I go to schools and I ask middle and high school students, is $50 a month a lot of money in 2024? Now, of course, their perspective is theirs, but they, of course, say, no, that's not a lot because I spend $50 on this or that. Well, it's $1.67 a day. Consider that the average cup of coffee costs $3.08 buying it out. The average wage in Maine is $20.08 an hour. That's 2.5 hours a month of labor, you working for your money. On the right side of the screen, we show how this $15,000 in contributions earned $18,000. This is what we call capital. This is your money working for you. So tying this all together, the importance of budgeting emergency funds, this is where we want it to lead. To be able to put money aside for whatever reason you want to, and where your money is earning money. So that in our life, maybe we can do a little less of the labor on the left side of the screen and see more money come from capital over there. Budgeting leads to savings. Savings leads to investing. Dedication to a budget can help you reach for these numbers and, of course, much more. Imagine putting in your own numbers into this formula. Some amount a month that you can find in your budget. Maybe you had a leak in the streaming services and you cut a few and you've got an extra $37, plus a few dollars from this, a few dollars from that, maybe more than 50. Or on the opposite side, this webinar is not about paying off debt, but let's not forget, if for our folks who are trying to pay off debt, finding that $50 a month right now could be putting toward debt, and then you get rid of the debt, and then you can start looking at the saving and investing part of this equation. Speaking of that, the next session that follows up on this one is in April. And that's going to pick up where we left off. Going from the emergency fund in the budget, you're on a budget, you have your fund in place, or you're working toward that, and you're wondering what's next. The question, are you ready to invest or start long-term savings? Maybe still managing debt. And we'll talk more in depth about those steps on the road to your financial success and wellness. And I think that's almost my last slide. I have some frequently asked questions that I ask myself, and these may overlap with questions you have, which I'm happy to field here in a minute. And I think we're right on time. So a lot of folks ask me, should I be, spending my money in cash, debit, or credit? Because some folks say you spend less if you use cash. I've found in my experience, it really depends on the person. Cash burns a hole in my pocket. I'm very good with a credit card, and as long as I'm budgeted. So the question I always ask, are you truly on a budget? If you have yourself on a budget and you know what you're capable and what you should or want to spend in each category, then whether you're using cash, debit, or credit shouldn't matter. But again, everyone's a little different. If you know yourself and you know that plastic makes it easier for you, definitely look at some of your expenses in terms of cash, especially, let's say, going out with some friends. You may want to have a certain amount, bring your cash with you and leave the plastic at home. Again, knowing yourself is very, very important. Another big question that comes up, my income is variable. How do I budget for that? How do I manage that? Very tricky. There are many ways to do it. You can look at averaging your income over time and saying, on average, what do I make? And base your budget on that. Another key is the emergency fund. If you have your emergency fund in place, you can handle dips in your income. So there's a couple of critical pieces to that. Variable expenses. How do I handle variable expenses? Very similar answer. Average them out over time. For example, my life insurance bill comes once a year. I could average it out over 12 months. I don't. I pay it in full once a year when it comes because my budget is for a year. So I'm able to put that into the budget and know when it's coming and know the impact. Car insurance, same thing. However, if you can't pay it all at once and you still need the smaller chunk, that's how you can handle variable expenses in general, spreading them out over months on average. Again, ultimately, if you have an emergency fund in place, once you do, that is your foundation and that's your fallback point. And if you get a surprise variable expense, you can take it out of your emergency fund and then replenish your fund later. And then where can I keep my emergency fund? Well, it depends, but there are options. You have to consider liquidity. In other words, how quickly can I get to my money if I need it? So if most of us need our emergency fund handy, we probably want to keep it in our bank account. Then you look at what type of bank account. If you need your emergency fund extremely liquid and available, you'll probably keep it in a regular checking or a regular savings account where you can access it immediately with no hoops to jump through. However, if your emergency fund, for those of you, and there were about half of you who said you got several months of expenses, I recommend going to your bank and looking at where you have your emergency fund and seeing if you can get a better return in a certificate of deposit or a high yield savings account or a money market account. I recently moved my emergency fund a few months ago from a savings account that was earning less than 0.5%. And I moved it into a money market account and now I earn 2.6%. That's a big difference. It's a few $100s a year. I then took part of my emergency fund that I know I don't need today, and I put it into a certificate of deposit earning 4.5%. So having it available and liquid, we probably don't want our emergency fund to be in things like stocks, which are risky, and the values fluctuate, and it can take a few days to get our money. For most folks, we probably want our emergency funds available, which means your bank. But within the bank, look at the ways you can get more interest. I simply went into the bank and said, how can I earn more interest on my emergency fund? What accounts do you have available? And they showed me a variety, and I chose the one that made sense for me. Online banks as well. Lots of resources for folks. Fame, tremendous resource. I looked up some others, credit and debt counseling. I'm going to put these into the chat, and they'll be available after as well. Financial relief resources for Mainers, online budgeting worksheet, more information about emergency funds, and email address as well. And again, I am going to open these links and put them in the chat while I'm answering questions. But I want to make sure, yeah, that was my last slide. So I am happy to field questions. And again, I'm going to, and if I'm answering questions, just wait till the end and I will put those links in the chat.
Steve, we don't have any questions in the Q&A. But one of the things I noticed is that the links that you were sharing in the chat, not everybody was seeing unless I posted them. So I think it has something to do with your hosting access today. So what I was just going to let people know is that once this webinar is uploaded to YouTube, Steve will be sending out an email to all of you with the slide deck and a link to the recording. And Steve, if you want to include the links in that email instead, although they're probably hyperlinked in the PowerPoint perhaps.
Yes, they are.
So, but either way, we can include the links as well. So not only for the budget worksheet, Steve, that you shared earlier, I did copy and reshare it.
Okay.
But yeah, and then, I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A. But just to remind folks, Steve is available anytime if you want to email him with questions. There's always an opportunity to follow up and provide more information. And we hope you'll come back in April. Thank you, Steve. That was great. I think always a helpful reminder, and my big takeaway, and it's always the takeaway, how much we underestimate those small purchases. I think streaming is a big one for a lot of us, and then how we underestimate on the other side the impact of small savings. So I think
Yes.
it really helped to
Every little bit.
emphasize every little bit helps. So, well, thank you so much, everyone. And again, we'll get this posted right away, and we appreciate you joining us. Have a great, great day and a great weekend.
Thank you all. I'm gonna, before I end it, I am gonna put those links in just in case somebody's waiting.
Great.
They want to get those right away. I should be able to just copy and paste them right in.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah.